Okay, right now we with Larry Marshall, basketball coach. For the people that don't know, state your name, where you from, and how was it growing up?
My name is Larry Marshall. I'm from a place called Henderson, Kentucky. Very small community. Um, I was born in 1955, so that was the heart of the civil rights movement. Um, and then there was a lot of segregation within the communities and education. And then it also became the first generation of um, minorities that went to integration and high school integration and elementary integration. And for me, my focus was placed upon me by my father and my mother, but mostly my father. He said that, I had to break the curse and become the first generation of college family, college graduate. And my focus was always about graduating from college. It was never about being a professional athlete. My parents were very, very poor, but yet at the same time, very wealthy in the sense that there was a lot of love in the house. There was a lot of turmoil in the house. Uh, they married young. My mom was 15 years old when I was born, and my dad was 18 years old. So they didn't have an opportunity to have a young life. My mother became a mother at a very early age, and so I became a dual parent recipient. My grandmother became my parent, and I lived with my grandmother for quite some time. So it was somewhat confusing to me at first until I began to understand it um, as a young man. And my father just always made sure that my focus was college graduate. So getting through high school was never an issue for me. Going to college was a primary issue. And because of the civil rights movement and the civil rights fight that occurred back in that time, I faced some adversities. Um, I was always a champion of change. My intellectual concept of who I am was always fight for the less worthy. I was always the largest and the biggest person as well as an athlete on my teams and in my schools. So when it came down to issues of change, I became the leader of that change, which put me in isolated situations a lot of times where I end up fighting for a cause, but end up fighting for that cause by myself. And so therefore, being penalized as an individual, creating an issue for administration. Um, in high school, I led, a walkout for a number of reasons: education, lack of educational tools in the school, dress codes, a lot of different things. And but also was the number one athlete in my school. Was an MVP on my football team, MVP on my basketball team. Um, and I realized that the only way that I could go to college was through athletics. But at the same time, it put me through a fight because my humanity was more important to me than going to college. But at the same time, I had to have a balance. So I got my first offer from several different Division One schools, but I chose Florida. Florida Institute indicated to me that the coach, through the coach called me and said, "Listen, I can't honor your scholarship because they say we have that first quota of blacks in the school. Said you're welcome to come to school, but they really don't want you here." So I decided, well, I got to go to school, and all the schools I had turned down didn't have a position for me before. Afterwards, so I ended up going to Three Rivers Junior College, um, which was probably the worst experience of my life, but also one of the best experiences of my life. Um, it put me in a position where I was in the education department under what they call you call it now special education, but what they called it at that point was tutorial classes, and I had no idea what tutorial classes meant. So I was in these classes getting straight A's, and I thought college was extremely easy, and I told my mother that, and she thought that college was extremely easy for me too. She's like, "Yo, you should have been doing this." But then I got a notification from a one of the teachers that told me, like, explain to me what these tutorial classes meant. So she told me that I didn't need to be in those classes. I need to be in regular classes. And I was like, I don't understand. So when she broke it down to me, I said, all right, I got to get out of here. When she said that they didn't count towards graduation and that they didn't count, I couldn't transfer them. I was like, wow, okay. So I had to go talk to my coach. I said, Coach, I got to come out of these classes. And he informed me that his name was Gene Best at the time. He's still living. He said, you're not here to graduate from college. You're here to play basketball. And I said, no. I said, I can't go back home and tell my father I came to college to play basketball when he's expecting for me to be the first generation of educated individuals within the family. And so I said, I got to come out of these classes. So he indicated to me that, well, he specifically said to me that if I came out of those classes, that he would take my scholarship. I said, well, you could take it next year, but you can't take it this year. And I'm going out of these classes. I'm coming out of these classes. So I went and took some regular classes. And he and I, needless to say, didn't agree on a lot of things at that point. But I looked at that at first thinking that, that was a black and white issue. But I began to understand now that at that point, how the question that I had was, how does an athlete, a black athlete, go to college and, one, not graduate, or two, graduate and read on a third grade level? I just couldn't understand it, but I did at that moment. I realized how it could happen. And I said that was not going to happen to me. So a lot of my teammates that were African American or blacks, like myself, did not graduate. And they were fine with playing basketball. I then did not go back to that school, which is Three Rivers Junior College, and had an opportunity through a community leader. His son went to school at Indiana University for his master's degrees. The individual's name was Pierre Jackson, but the son's name was Donald Jackson, and Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson. And he knew a mutual coach and friend of his that was at Indiana University studying their master's program, who became the coach at Voorhees College, which is in Denmark, South Carolina. And so I ended up, through his relationship and his affiliations, taking a scholarship opportunity to Denmark, South Carolina at Voorhees College. Upon my arrival, I met Jake Ford, who was my coach, who had played basketball for the Seattle Supersonics. So then it was the first time that I thought about, I may have an opportunity to go professionally. And I depended on Coach Ford to kind of teach me what it was to be a professional. And we had a great relationship. He had me playing all 5 positions: point guard, 2 guard, 3. He said, you're one of the best players, if not the best player in this conference. And then our relationship went sour. It went sour because I had to go to class one morning and practice. He said, practice for 7 o'clock in the morning. I said, Coach, I can't go to practice tomorrow morning because I have an exam at 8 o'clock, and I need to study for that. So he said, I'm sure, don't worry about that. I'll take care of the exam. I'm like, Coach, I don't need you to take care of my grades. I'll take care of that. So he told me, he said, I know you're going to do the right thing. I did. I went to college. I went to class. And I came in for that evening practice. I didn't go to that morning practice. And he told me, he said, you decided not to come to practice. I said, Coach, I told you I had an exam. And he said, well, I told you I would take care of the exam. I said, Coach, I don't need you to take care of my education. I can take care of that. And so anyway, he penalized me. He said I had to run 500 laps. So I started running. And then he told the manager to count every one of them. So along with the manager, I started counting. 1, 2, Coach, 3, 4. And he said, oh, you've been a knucklehead. He didn't say knucklehead. He basically said asshole. So I was like, Coach, I'm just making sure that you know the number and I know the number. So he said, well, add another 500 to that number. I said, no problem, Coach, it's 1,000. And I kept running. He said, you think you smart, get out of my gym. And he threw me out of the gym. So at that moment, I realized it wasn't a black and white issue. I realized that it's a determination issue. Education has to be the most important thing in your life in order to succeed in life. I was not willing to give up an education for athletics because my father wouldn't accept that. He told me he didn't want to hear anything about basketball before I left to go to college. I don't want to hear anything about basketball, going to the pros or anything else. I need you to get that scholarship. I need you to get that academic graduation certificate. I said, okay, I agreed to that. We made a deal. He said, when you get to the point where you feel like you don't need that degree, then there's a fight that has to take place between you and I. And if you win, you don't have to go back to college. If I win, you got to go back to college. And so that fight did occur. I had thought for a moment that I wasn't going to graduate from college, that I was more concerned about athletics. And I was also concerned because a lot of my schoolmates that I went to high school with that went to college and dropped out of college and come back home had jobs. And they had apartments and they had their families and they had money. And I had nothing myself at the end of my sophomore year. So I felt like they did it right and I was doing it wrong. And I got a job from Firestone Steel Corporation making $500 a week. And I thought it was real good money. At that time, it was good money. And I decided I was not going to go to college. And I told my dad. And he said, well, you know what we agreed upon? I said, yeah, I do, Dad. So we went out on I said, you want to do it inside or outside? I said, we do this inside or outside. It don't matter to me. He said, well, we done tore up enough of your mama's furniture wrestling. This is not going to be a wrestle. This is a fight. So we went outside, and I had studied karate. So I knew a little bit about, round houses and frontal kicks and back spins and all of that. So I studied a little bit and I used a little bit of it. And he said, oh, wait a minute, hold on for a second. You know a little bit of that funny stuff, huh? You've been preparing for this. So he said a prayer. He said, wait just a minute. He bowed his head down. He said a prayer. He said, okay, let's go. And I went to get him a frontal kick and he caught my leg and pulled me to him and hit me in the chest. I landed flat on the ground. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't see. And he just got up and walked. He walked on in the house. My mother came out. She was hollering, you okay? You okay? Finally got me up. She runs in the house with him, screaming and hollering, and very upset with him. And I just walked in the house and I sat at the kitchen table. I said, Mom, leave him alone. That was a deal we made. And he said, man always honors his word. And he said, you look a little peakish. You want some orange juice or you want some milk? I said, I'll take some milk, Dad. He said, you better take both of them. You look a little peakish. So he gave me some orange juice and some milk. Gave me some eggs and some sausage. And he put it on the table. We were eating. And reached in his pocket, he pulled out a ticket. He said, your plane leaves tomorrow. I said, Dad, I still got work. I got work for another 3 weeks. And there's nobody at school. He said, call your coach and tell him you'll be there tomorrow morning. So I said, Dad, there's no dorm open. There's nothing. He said, call your coach and tell him you'll be there tomorrow morning. So I got on the phone. I called Coach. I said, Coach, I gotta come to school tomorrow morning. He said, Larry, there's no housing here. I said, I know. I said, but my father wants me out of here. He said, well, you tell your dad that there's no housing. I said, Dad, Coach said there's no housing. He said, tell that coach, don't let me have to get on this phone and talk to him. He said, in fact, give me the phone. So he got on the phone. He said, listen, my son will be there in the morning. If you're not there to pick him up, I'll be there the next morning. And you don't want to see me. So whatever it is you got to do for my son, you make sure you do it. So he said, he gave the phone back to me and Coach said, well, I guess you're coming tomorrow. We'll figure it out. So I did. I got on the flight. I went back to school. And when coach decided that he kicked me out of the school for not going to practice that day, I had to make a decision. It was either play ball or graduate. And that graduation was an honor of to my father and my family. And I honor that more than anything. So I lost my scholarship my junior year, end of my junior year. So I had 1 year left. I couldn't tell my father I wasn't in college. I didn't know how to tell my father that. I didn't tell him that. I didn't tell my mom. I went home during the summer, raised up a little bit of money that I had, tried to save as much as I could, and I went back to college. And when I went there, I had no place to stay. I wasn't admitted in school, and I didn't have the money to pay for it. I had a little bit of money. So I go to my superintendent, not my athletic director. His name was Sanderford. I said, Coach Sanderford, I said, I don't have a scholarship. I said, I'd like to run track for you. So I need to finish school. He said, what happened? Tell me about what happened in the basketball. And I told him. He said, I heard something. I heard variances of it, but I heard exactly what you're saying too. He said, I tell you what, I can't give you a full scholarship, but what I can give you is room and board. I said, you give me room and board, coach, I'll take care of the rest of it. What you want me to do, run 100-yard dash, those discs, whatever you want me to do, I'll do. He said, I just want you to finish college. He said, you got tuition. So I said, I'll take care of the rest of it from there. So he paid the tuition, and I slept on floors. I slept in tree houses. I knew how to survive because I was a hunter. It wasn't nothing for me to sleep on the ground. I was a hustler. I figured out I'd go hustle watermelons for the summer, whatever I had to do to get a meal. Then I said, listen, I got to survive no matter what. So I figured out how to survive and go to college, take my classes, and at the same time be a part of society. And so a lot of my friends who were on the basketball court and on the team, they weren't going to college. They weren't going to school. So my philosophy was education first. So I went out and I partied with them. I did whatever they were doing. But come morning, I'd get up and get my breakfast, go back, take me a shower, brush my teeth, and I was out to class. And they would go jump back into bed. So when they saw my name on the graduation certificate, on the list, they said, I'll be dog, man, you were going to class. I said, yeah, education first. And I realized what that meant to my father upon graduation day. As they graduate, they have certain seats for you. And our seats were kind of in the middle because of our last name being Marshall. My father decided that was not his seat. On the front row was his seat. So he went to the front row and sat down. And they said, excuse me, that's somebody else's seat. He said, not today. This is my seat. And security came and he said, listen, unless you want to be dealt with, you move away from me. And so I guess they realized how serious he was. So when I crossed that line, that stage, and received my certificate was the first time I really seen my father cry. And I knew at that point what that meant to him. And when he hugged me, he said, I hope you're man enough to do what I did for your kids, right? So, but you just started a level of graduation for this entire family. So there was a lot of weight that was on my shoulder, but there was also a lot of weight that was released when I understood what that meant. Then I saw my sisters graduating from college because they expected it because I graduated. They felt like they could do it because I graduated. And it kept going. So as I came back from college, I'm looking to see I got married in college. I had a daughter. Her name was Ashika. My wife's name is Dorothy. I met them in Denmark, South Carolina, and they were the reason I was able to come out of the streets, because I found something to live for that was bigger than me. Usually, I was selfish. I only did what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it and how I wanted to do it. But once I became married, once I had a daughter, it gave me a greater reason to live for something greater than me. And I understood what family meant at that point. And so anyway, I brought my family back to Kentucky. And after getting my, a job at Earl C. Clemens Job Corps Center and fighting for human rights there as well, and human rights within the community of which I lived in, which is Henderson, I discovered economic development. I discovered people living in depressed conditions. I thought our houses were the only house that was bad, right? When it rained, we had to go put water pails under it. The roof was waving at you as you walked away. And then I started going into some very other houses, and I look at, man, we are living bad here. Because I had seen so much different between Henderson and going to Missouri and going to Detroit and going to Carolina. I'm like, whoa, some things need to change. So I met a older man. His name was Eugene Gilbert, who I was friends with with his sons. And he said, I need you to come in to the city commission meeting with me. I've never been to a city commission meeting before, didn't know what it was. So I went to the city commission meeting and I heard the conversations going about economic development and the utilization of housing and urban renewal and community development. I'm like, why is that not in our community? But I saw that they were using the funds that they were getting and putting them somewhere else other than where it should have been. So we formed a committee, and then the next thing I know, we formed a Citizens Advisory Council for Community Development, and that's where it spearheaded from that. And we got into economic development. I became the chairman of the Citizen Advisory Committee and eventually became the director of community development in my town, writing grants and all the other nature. But also understanding that sports made me who I am, I realized that some of the kids that were around our community were facing the same issues that I was facing. So I started a program, didn't even know what the program was at the time. I called it AWARE, AWARE, activists working hard, working actively for reform and excellence is what AWARE stood for. And got a lot of young people, and we just was fighting for our community and fighting for grants and fighting for other opportunities. And next thing you know, I became a director of urban renewal and community development in Henderson. And we started creating jobs for individuals, started getting into downtown revitalizations, recreation recovery action. There was an old school called Douglas High School. There was a historical Black institution, a high school, and it had been taken over and ridden in by pigeons. So I had to get the pigeon manure removed from that school, which the manure was about 4 or 5 feet deep in the school. And just started creating corporations around me, from individuals within the community, involving them in trades programs, whether it was electricians, plumbers, carpenters, demolition experts, whatever it may be. I created jobs for our community, which gave our community hope. But it also isolated me in the process as an individual that they needed to get rid of, because we didn't have any Black firemen in the department. There was one that came along later. We had no Black police officers. There was one that we created later. We had one physician that was a doctor when I was coming up. His name was Dr. House, when I was a young kid, but then he allegedly got killed, but some say he died on a boating accident in the Ohio River. Some say he got killed in the Ohio River. So, you never know. But then there was no other Black professionals in the town. So I became the target of change. but I also became the target of solutions and exclusions. And it forced a lot of hatred my way on both sides, both black and white. And then I ended up being recruited by Norwalk Development Corporation, which I knew was a setup to get me out of the community. But at the same time, God intervened, and God put me in City University of New York. Same day, I ended up getting an opportunity to work for the City University of New York as their contracts manager. So I took that job. I went back to my hometown and told my wife, we're leaving, and I have a new job. So that pretty much was how I got here on the Northeast coast. And while I was there in Kentucky, I was taking kids around different places, and some of the older guys going and playing. I thought it was just me doing it for me, didn't know what it was really about until I got here. That's when it all changed. As I moved in here in 85, 1987, I started thinking about how I could really affect changes in our community, and realized that the focus had to be on the youth. And I was living in Perth Amboy in 1985 through 1987. And I moved to Atlantic Highlands in 87 and 88, and then I moved here in Mattawan in 89. So I moved into Mattawan, and at the time, I moved on the street that had dilapidated units on it. We had built a brand new house there, and I wanted to be in the hood. I wanted to be in the mud, because that's where I came from, and I was comfortable there. The doo-wops were, you know, a multiplex unit that was owned by a church, but it was rat infested, it was drug infested, and the church was right next door, right behind the doo-wops. I couldn't understand that. I'm like, how can the church own that and then allow this to be as such? They had property next to it, and then after I had a meeting with the pastor, which was Mr. Jones, I understood that. You notice I didn't call him Reverend Jones. I called him Mr. Jones. I understood that the church was about money. And I come from a Christian family where church is about saving souls. But I clearly saw that was about money. It wasn't about saving souls. And a lot of the young men that were in that doo-wop were guys, young black men, black boys that had nowhere to go. And so drugs were their outlet. And I had confrontations with them, and they understood it. They respected me, because I moved 2 kids in the neighborhood. But I also took those same individuals and created Kids Plus. When I said, I'm gonna change these young men's lives. And one of the young men that was involved in that, he was like 6'6", 6'7". His name was Mark Pearson. They called him True. He lives down the block here. He was one of the ringleaders. I had to get him out of jail one time. And I got real close to his grandmother. And I told her, I said, I'll take care of him. I'll make sure he's okay. I said, but sometime I'm gonna let him have to swather in his own salt. So she said, I trust you. He's yours. And he called me one time. I got him out of jail and said, listen, this is the last time I'm coming to get you out of jail. He went back to jail. And I told him, I'm not coming to get you anymore. I said, you could have been an athlete to go to college. You could have been a professional athlete. I said, but you chose the streets. Now you're going to have to, you made your bed, you got to lie in it. Well, I let him lie in it. And when he came out, he came and he apologized to me. And he worked with me. And now he's the senior counselor for drug abuse youth programs in the state of New Jersey. That was my element of success. And I saw a lot of other things that I was doing with Kids Plus to help a lot of kids.